It was just 8 days before President Trump was inaugurated when David Ignatius at the Washington Post broke the news that there had been secret communications during the presidential transition period between incoming Trump National Security Advisor Mike Flynn and the Russian ambassador. As Ignatius wrote at the time, quote, "What did Flynn say, and did it undercut the U.S. sanctions?" Well, despite multiple denials from multiple people in the Trump administration that Flynn had discussed sanctions on his calls with the Russian government, a month later, the Washington Post would report that Flynn, in fact, did discuss sanctions with the Russian government on that call. Flynn was ultimately fired as National Security Advisor, and he ultimately pled guilty for lying to the FBI about that call. But for over 2 years, we've been curious to get more information about what exactly Flynn said when he had that conversation with the Russian ambassador that he and so many other people in the Trump transition publicly lied about. The call has been described in the Mueller report and in court documents, but that's all we've had is sort of vague descriptions. A couple of weeks ago, a federal judge demanded that prosecutors post a transcript of Flynn's call with the Russians on the public docket. The deadline for doing that was today. And in a development I don't think any of us saw coming, prosecutors today basically refused the judge's order to hand over that transcript. They told the judge they don't think that transcript was relevant to Flynn's guilty plea or to his upcoming sentencing. And I'm not a lawyer, but that seems weird, right? I mean, we know clearly from court documents that Flynn's discussion about sanctions with the Russians was absolutely 100% definitely at the root of Flynn's guilty plea. That call would seem to be utterly relevant to the determination of his guilt. Why would prosecutors refuse the judge's order to hand over the transcript of that call? And what is likely to happen now? Joining us now is Devlin Barrett, national security reporter at the Washington Post. Mr. Barrett, it's really nice to have you here. Thanks for making the time.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
Let me ask you a real basic, almost logistical question first. Do we know that there are transcripts of Flynn's call or calls with the Russian government? Do we know that those calls were caught in U.S. government intercepts?
We do know that, but we only know that from sources because those transcripts are still classified. And that's really at the heart of what the prosecutors have decided to do here.
When you say that prosecutors, I mean, it's hard for us to discern what prosecutors have decided to do here because, at least to me, a non-lawyer, reading their explanations to the judge as to why they're not handing over that transcript, it feels a little bit like legal refrigerator poetry. They never say, we're not giving you this, judge, because it's classified, or we'd like to talk to you about this ex parte, or we'd like to, litigate this some other way. They just say, this isn't relevant. You understand, right? Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. What do you understand about what they're doing here?
I think the point is this. Even the existence of these transcripts, even the existence of these phone calls, the recordings of those phone calls, look, the entire world knows these calls happen. The entire world knows that they were recorded by, on intercepts. But the problem for the prosecutors is that they have never publicly acknowledged that. Even if you look at number of the court filings in this case, even in those filings, at moments where Flynn says to the investigators, I know you guys probably recorded this call anyway, that part is redacted in those documents. So the government is in this position of not acknowledging that these recordings exist. And then the judge says you have to make them public. The trick is that the judge does not have the authority on his own to declassify stuff. And so the prosecutors are doing a kind of dance. It may be too coy, it may be too cute. And here's the real problem for them. Judge Sullivan does not dance. Yeah. Judge Sullivan is a hard-headed guy who wants what he wants, and he wants it right away. So the notion that Judge Sullivan is going to quietly go away just because the prosecutors sort of come up with a little linguistic dance around this issue, I think is very unlikely.
Also, it occurs to me that federal judges at all sorts of levels, but federal district court judges must deal with classified information all the time. I mean, it's not that classified information only comes up in the FISA court. It comes up in all sorts of different court cases, I would imagine. And so if this is an issue of classified material, wouldn't you expect the prosecutors to essentially go into classified material mode and deal with the judge about it on those terms? I think that's part of what also seems puzzling here.
Yeah, but I think you have to think of this as the first salvo of this back and forth. I think it's very likely that the judge will come back and say something to the effect of, to the exact point you're making, look, guys, you know what I ordered. What's the issue? What's the deal? You know what I want. And then you may see, I think one realistic scenario here is that you may see a sealed letter at that point where you have more of a, let's call it, an honest but closed-door conversation about this material. But a lot of times when classified issues come up in the courts, what ends up happening is there's long back and forths between the agency that possesses the classified information and wants to keep it secret, and a judge who, debates or considers, pressing the government further to declassify. And again, a judge can press them to declassify, but it's ultimately the agency's call. And so in a lot of these cases where classified information comes up, there's a long back and forth, and this may be the beginning, the first round of a long back and forth over this.
The person who probably has most at stake for the length of that back and forth is Mike Flynn, who doesn't technically have a sentencing date yet. He's got a joint status report in a couple of weeks on June 14th. If there is going to be wrangling between the prosecutors and the judge on something like this, or even potentially on the other thing they didn't hand anything over on, which was this issue of whether or not there's other Flynn-related material that's redacted from Mueller's report. If any of this stuff goes into that kind of long back and forth you're describing there, do you expect that would push Flynn's ultimate sentencing off even further?
Again, that's up to the judge, and this is a very particular judge who has very particular reputation for demanding more than some other judges would demand from the government. So it's up to the judge to decide if he doesn't like these answers and if that means he's going to hold up the sentencing for it. And remember, one of the big unknowns here, though, and I know we're all focused on the particular Flynn-Kislyak conversations that we know about, one of the other things that we really don't know about is how many other conversations like this were recorded, because that's also in what the judge ordered to be made public. And that may be an even bigger problem in the eyes of the prosecutors. But to be clear, we just don't know how large a group of calls that is.
And even if the judge does come to an accommodation with prosecutors about him getting to see that classified information for the purposes of informing his own sentencing decision, that doesn't necessarily mean that even the judge would be empowered to release that information to the public, even at that point.
Right.
Yeah, fascinating.
Right. Exactly.
Devlin Barrett, national security reporter for the Washington Post. Thank you for helping us sort this out. You have made more sense about this to me than anybody else who's talked about it all day. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for having me.
Much appreciated. All right, we've got much more to get to. This is a busy news night. I will tell you, it is right now about 1:30, and we are awaiting a press conference from local authorities who are expected to be providing an update on the shooting today that took place in Virginia Beach. As far as we know at this point, the death toll from that shooting is 11. 6 people, in addition to the 11 killed, were shot and wounded. An incredibly tragic day in Virginia Beach. It happened late this afternoon. We haven't heard very much from local authorities, but we're expecting a briefing imminently. We're going to take a quick break, and we will come out of that break and get back live to this press conference if it starts while we are away. Stay with us.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.